welcome everybody to this particular session where we're looking in particular the entire question of fact finding. And I think the frame of this conversation is really around the Gandhi Jayanti, and we mark the 154th anniversary of Gandhi's birthday. And uh, in this context, I want to briefly introduce the many Gandhis that there are, and what does Gandhiji, move on from that to the question, what does Gandhiji mean from the perspective of human rights? And then leave it to our panelists to reflect a little bit on what role Gandhiji can play, or remembering Gandhiji, or taking forward Gandhiji's ideals can play in uh, today's context. When we say that there are many Gandhis, one, of course, the point to note is that the, the main Gandhi has been imprisoned by the state. And there's certain perspective in which you see Gandhiji through programs, state-led programs, as it were. But I think the point of marking for Leaflet to mark Gandhi Jayanti is to say that there are other Gandhis as well. The other Gandhis we have to remember in today's context. Just to make a brief listing of the Gandhis that we need to remember today. One, of course, is the Gandhi who's the advocate of the principle of fraternity. And again, we have to go back to the entire communal violence in Nokali. And then you see the idea that the point of leadership is to be there when your people are suffering. The point of leadership is to be there and invoke the best as far as people are concerned, to bring the better angels of our being, as it were. The other Gandhiji who is obviously very, very vital today in the days of climate change is the Gandhiji who speaks to the environmental question, and the Gandhiji who says that, if your needs are not limited, we will strip the world bare like locusts. That's the other Gandhiji which we think we have to remember in today's context. And the third Gandhiji, which PUCL has invoked it many times, is the Gandhiji of an impish sense of humor. Often we think of Gandhiji in very formal terms, but we also forget the fact that he had a great sense of humor, and the idea that when he meets the king, and the king asks, and somebody asks him, why are you dressed in only a loincloth? His response is, the king has enough clothes on for both of us. So there's something about a sense of humor which can also guide us as an inspiration, taken from Gandhi. But I think the point which we really want to get to, as far as our gathering is concerned, is the Gandhiji who's an inspiration for the civil liberties movement. And again, this is a point which I feel we're not emphasized enough. And we go back a little bit to history, and we see that the first fact-finding reports, possibly the first fact-finding reports authored in the Indian context, one on Champaran agitation and one on Jallianwala Bagh, are really authored by Mahatma Gandhi. The other point, of course, is you go back to, we all know that he took very, very seriously the question of establishing a free press. He, be it in South Africa or be it in India, he established his own press. He wrote extensively, and the idea was constantly to communicate as to a wider public. So from that, what you get is, again, in his own words, the way he puts it, he says civil liberties, consistent with the observance of nonviolence, are the first steps towards Swaraj. It is the breadth of political and social life. It is the foundation of freedom. There's no room there for dilution or compromise. It is the water of life. And just one more quotation from him, which means a lot as far as civil liberties are concerned. He says, liberty of speech means that it is unassailed, even when the speech hurts. Liberty of the press can be said to be truly respected only when the press can comment in the severest terms upon any misrepresent matters. Freedom of association is truly respected when assemblies of people can discuss even revolutionary projects. I think coming from all of this, the point we get is also a Gandhiji who has a philosophical perspective on the state itself. And it's what end with just two small quotations. Again, what he says about the state. He says the state represents violence in a concentrated and organized form. The individual as a soul, but the state is a soulless machine. It can never be weaned from violence to which it owes its very existence. I look upon the increase in power of the state with the greatest fear, because although, while apparently doing good by minimizing exploitation, it does the greatest harm to mankind by destroying individuality, which lies at the root of all progress. And of course, we all know that Gandhiji, in terms of the great sedition trial in Ahmedabad, made perhaps the most eloquent, most powerful speech uh, against the sedition law. When he called Section 124A the prince among the political provisions of the Indian Penal Code, and a provision which is designed to suppress the liberty of the individual, which must have full full reign, apart from, of course, without any recourse to violence, as it were. So the Gandhiji as an exemplar or as the model for a civil liberties perspective, rooted in the constitution and rooted in civil liberties organizing outside in terms of civil liberties groups, is absolutely central and absolutely vital dimension. With this brief kind of a words of introduction, I just leave it to our panelists to also reflect a little bit on what does Gandhiji mean to them, coming from the work and the perspective they've done. And just to very briefly introduce our panel, which doesn't actually need much of an introduction, we'll begin with Justice Lokur, who everybody knows, doesn't needs absolutely no introduction as a former judge of the uh, Indian Supreme Court, and someone who's been very much a voice of different civil liberties struggles in the country, and very much a voice speaking up for the rule of law, and very much a voice speaking up for the constitution in today's times. Justice Lokur, would you like to comment a little bit on the entire question of Gandhiji's relevance from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Arvind. Um, there are two things about Gandhiji's philosophy which I think are very relevant today. One is his philosophy about satyagraha, the ability to protest and to demand the truth. Okay, that is, I think, one which is of great relevance today. The second is one of ahimsa. Today I find that Indian society, for a variety of reasons, has, become somewhat violent. We see lynchings, okay, something which probably did not happen maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, but now they become commonplace. We are seeing things like, murders, which are becoming extremely violent. I mean, earlier you kill a person with a knife or something, or maybe with a gunshot wound or something, but now, people are being burned. Of course, we had dowry deaths and all that, but that's of a different nature. But now you have people getting burned, people who are getting murdered are getting sliced, things like that. So I think the two things that I think we need to really discuss and debate and keep in mind so far as life today in India is concerned is the right to protest peacefully, which is what Gandhiji advocated, and non-violence. I think these are two things that we need to look at, very very carefully. Um, I think these two, to my mind, are the two very important things that we need to concentrate on in today's India. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Lokur. To introduce our next speaker again, who doesn't really need an introduction, Justice Chauhan, who's a retired justice who served as Chief Justice of both Uttarakhand and the Telangana High Court. And again, if people haven't read his work, I urge you to read his writings on the leaflet, where there's a marvelous piece looking at the art in the Constitution, which again gives you a sense of his deeper engagement with the meaning of the Constitution in its varied and diverse forms. In a civilizational sense, what does the Constitution mean? Is the question he explores in that really very, very interesting piece. Justice Chauhan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Arvind. Actually, Gandhiji is almost a Renaissance man, if I may use that term, for the father of our nation. So well read that I'm sure he must have been aware of what Plato and Hegel had to say about the theory of dialectics. I'm sure he was very well aware that our Vedas talk about that knowledge and truth cannot be discovered until and unless there is a discussion on a given topic. And that is what Amrita said, also reminds us in the argumentative Indian, that we are the most argumentative civilization on planet Earth. We like to discuss everything, and until and unless you have point and counterpoint or thesis or antithesis, you will not have a synthesis. And I think Gandhiji was very well aware of this entire strand. Secondly, his relevance is also today because we are getting towards what I call, away from pluralism, without realizing that the very foundation of our Indian civilization is assimilation and pluralism. President Radhakrishnan, in his book, The Hindu View of Life, says that the hallmark of the Eastern civilization, of the Oriental civilization, is that it believes in assimilating every thought, every theory, every school of thought, contradictory thinking. And I think that is the essence of what Gandhiji was trying to tell us, that when you have one thinking, for example, his work in South Africa will tell you, there's one thought of the government, of the apartheid government in South Africa. Look at he speaks. First, he defends the Indians. Then he starts himself breaking the law to bringing a counter narrative. This he does again under the British rule in India. There's the thinking of what the government has to say about Jallianwala Bagh, and yet he brings the counter narrative and he is so objective. And look at his objectivity. He even criticizes the Indian side, saying that yes, perhaps they have been a bit ruthless with dealing with the Britishers. So it's his objectivity, his acting all, strictly like a lawyer when he deals with facts and figures and how he presents them. And I think that is amazing. And his entire criticism of sedition, I think, needs to be brought out because this law is now being so overused by the present government that we really need to discuss what is sedition and what are its limits. And I'm sure we would love to hear Justice Lokur on that, because Justice Lokur is, one of those human rights judges we were fortunate to have. So I think that is the relevance of Gandhi, about assimilation and pluralism.
Thank you, Justice Chauhan. I'll hand the floor over to Kavita Srivastava, who is the president of the People's Union of Civil Liberties, which is one of the oldest civil liberties organizations in India today. Kavita, floor is yours.
Yeah, so you want us to reflect a little on what this Gandhi Jayanti means to us, to me, to the PUCL. I think it is unchanged for the last few years. I think we are stuck with the same set of questions, and I think we do need that philosophy and understanding and praxis of Gandhi to help us. As stated by some earlier speakers, I'd like to once again emphasize, how do you deal with this increasing polarization between communities? Like this whole Hindu-Muslim polarization being created by state, and now with a lot of consensus of the people, particularly of the majoritarian community, believing a lot of what is said. And that just impacts actually human nature. It is brutalizing us. That's something that makes us go back to Gandhi. And obviously, truth is a complete travesty, because there's jingoism, propaganda, there's an effort to kill any kind of inquiry. And I think we are living with a tyrannical state. Even Gandhi was living in the presence of a tyrannical state, but perhaps there were some rules. There seem to be no rules now. So how do you then evolve a system of praxis? How do you develop being nonviolent, adhering to nonviolence, adhering to sincerity in what we are professing? This whole journey of bringing out your own sincerity in your praxis to take on the tyrannical order in an absolutely non-violent way. These are some of the values, along with the value of fraternity, because I feel the divisions are so deep that they're inside our homes, they are between two people. So it is for some of these things that I would like to remember. I would like to rethink Gandhi, reread perhaps Gandhi's Satyagrah, reread some of his writings, especially now that very soon we will have Manu's diaries coming out. I mean, very soon we're going to have them out. I think there'll be something much more that he wrote towards the end to understand our praxis. I'm more of a praxis person. So I and my organization needs to understand, how do we take on the state, the tyrannical state, the divisive state, this jingoism and propaganda from the point of view of nonviolence. Thank you.
Thank you, Kavita. I'll now hand the floor to Pratik Sinha. Pratik Sinha is the editor at Alt News, and his LinkedIn profile says I think very succinctly captures what he does. It says he researches propaganda, he writes about propaganda, and he slays propaganda. So it's a really one-line sutra which captures exactly the extent and the extent of the work that you've done over the years. Pratik, what does Gandhiji mean for you in your work?
Gandhiji in one of his writings said the word satya, truth, is derived from sat, which means being. Nothing is or exists in reality except truth. And he goes on to equate truth with God. Well, I'm an atheist, but I, what the importance of truth that he emphasized on, and how our present society is so devoid of truth. In fact, the weaponization of information has become so extreme that it has become the basis for everything that we see. If falsehoods are being churned by the second every single day, including our diplomats going outside and saying that there is no discrimination in this country very recently. Ministers going outside and saying that. So falsehoods are being churned every second in this country now. And so it is very important, I think, to take back the conversation and emphasize upon the importance of truth, or rather facts, in public conversations, which there's a complete lack of currently.
Thank you, Pratik. And having had some kind of a broader introduction to what the relevance of Gandhiji is to each of our panelists, let's try and narrow it down a little bit. And narrow it down a little bit in terms of the entire question of, the topic, which is, I think, a very marvelous topic, which is the idea of my experiments with truth. Right? And all our speakers have reflected a little bit on what truth meant for Gandhiji. And the particular point, which I think just to place before everybody, is which I mentioned a little earlier, which is the fact-finding report which Gandhiji did on the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, which is still a very, very brilliant report. Brilliant report in terms of saying that you need to look at the facts in a context. And the issue of what General Dyer did is not a question of a few bad apples. It's really a question of a logical outcome of the then existing colonial policy. And Gandhiji goes on to call what happens in Jallianwala Bagh as a crime against humanity, even before Nuremberg. So there's something really important about even the very specific methodology which Gandhiji adopted. And as Justice Chauhan indicated, that the question of a training of a lawyer comes in the way you approach the entire question of facts and the way you approach the entire question of fact-finding in all of Gandhiji's works. The commitment to truth is not just an abstract truth, but it's a very concrete truth at the level of evidence and the level of facts itself. Keeping that kind of a broad context in mind, we'll go to the second round of questions, taking it more specifically, keeping the thematic in mind. Justice Lokur, if you'd like to elaborate a little bit on how do you see the contribution of fact-finding itself to the project of Indian democracy?
Yes, you see, I don't think there can be any debate about the fact that fact-finding is absolutely important, right? You have propaganda, which may also be true, right? But it's blown out of proportion in a sense. But then you also have, things that are happening which the establishment or the state doesn't want people to know. Okay, so that's where fact finding becomes very important. You have a situation like you're having today in Manipur, for example. Okay, now you have the Editors Guild, which went and four of their representatives went, and they've come out with some kind of a report. Okay, you had some lawyers who had gone, and they have also come out with some kind of a report. Now, that is a fact-finding inquiry that has been conducted by them. Now, there are two ways of looking at it. One is that have they selected the facts, or are they being selective in the facts that they are disclosing, or are they objective in the facts that they are disclosing? I think Gandhiji had propagated the idea of being objective about it, as Justice Chauhan mentioned. So, you may not agree with the facts that they have come out with, you meaning the establishment. You may not agree with the facts that they have come out with in their report. But then nothing prevents the establishment from coming out with its own story, right? What, according to them, are the facts. But you can't say that, listen, I don't agree with the facts that you have presented. I don't agree with your fact finding report, but I will not tell you what I think. That's wrong. Okay. So when we are looking at facts, when we're looking at fact finding reports of events that are happening, I'm not only talking about, Manipur, but then you may have something like, what has happened in Joshimath, the subsidence of land. Okay, what are the facts that have happened? What are the causes of the subsidence? So it could be anything. It could be the environment. It could be some incident that has occurred, some event that has occurred. You will have the necessity of projecting to the people what actually has happened. Okay, that's the sense of a fact finding inquiry. It must be objective, and if somebody does not agree with the views that have been expressed in that, or the facts as have been found, or are said to be tainted or selective, and so on and so forth, fine, come out with your own narrative. But don't just condemn a report prepared by somebody and say that, well, I'm not going to tell you what I think is right. I'm only going to tell you what I think that you're saying is wrong. But what is right according to me, I'm sorry, I don't want to tell you. I don't think that's what Gandhiji intended. I don't think that's what fact finding is all about. Yeah, thank you.
So, would you locate the question of fact finding in terms of a constitutional sense? Where would you place that entire issue? Would you locate it in the Article 19 framework, or how do you see that?
Yeah, it's, I think, a part of Article 19, certainly. It's a part of Article 21. It's a part of Article 14 in certain respects. You see, let me give you, one of the first few fact-finding reports, so to speak, that the Supreme Court came out with. That was about the pollution in the Mussoorie Hills. You may remember, the limestone quarrying was going on in the Mussoorie Hills, right? And that was polluting Dehradun, which is low down in the hills. Now, was it actually polluting Dehradun? Were the people actually, breathing limestone dust? The Supreme Court set up committees, fact-finding committees. Tell us what is happening, because we're not getting information. We're getting only one part of the information, which has come from the petitioner. The government is not wanting to tell us anything. So the Supreme Court set up committees and, ultimately passed appropriate orders. You had committees being used by the Supreme Court as fact-finding bodies. They are objective. I mean, when you talk about the environment, you have the Central Empowered Committee, the CEC. What did they do? I mean, they just told you that these are the facts. Okay? And they told you the facts from the point of view of both the sides, from the point of view of persons who were objecting to some environmental degradation being caused by a project, and the view of the government. Well, these are the facts. You decide whatever you want to do. Okay, so fact finding, therefore, I think has a very important role to play constitutionally, right? And even otherwise. I mean, it's a matter of daily life that we are concerned with, which is Article 21, freedom of speech and expression. Yeah, certainly. You can't say that. Listen, I will not give you a fact finding report, or if you give a fact finding report, I'm going to arrest you for it, and I'm going to file an FIR against you. What are you doing? You're actually suppressing the freedom of speech and expression by doing that. Okay, so yeah, it certainly has a constitutional basis, undoubtedly.
Thank you, Justice Lokur. Justice Chauhan, if you'd also like to address the question of the taking forward the discussion initiated by Justice Lokur on what is the constitutional basis of fact finding, what is the legal basis of fact finding, and what may possibly be the limitations which one can think of in terms of the law when it comes to questions of fact finding.
Thank you, Arvind. Just to take further what Justice Lokur has just mentioned, the very issue of fact-finding or the subject of fact-finding is very obvious from the preamble of the Constitution. It begins with liberty of thought and expression. Can I express something unless I have knowledge of that particular area? And therefore, fact-finding is embedded in preamble, which is the key to the Constitution, which contains the constitutional morality, which contains the constitutional mandate. Of course, we find it further in Article 19(1)(a) when it says the fundamental freedom of speech and expression. Article 14, which talks about equality, which means something that has to do with being against arbitrary action of the government. As the Honorable Supreme Court says, arbitrariness is anathema to Article 14, to the concept of equality. And of course, Article 21, which talks about life and personal liberty. Life and personal liberty cannot exist unless I have, I can make informed decision and give informed consent. Therefore, I cannot give an informed decision unless I have full facts before me. Even in relationship of a doctor and a patient, we say, please give all the information to the patient so he can make an informed decision and give you informed consent. The other thing to notice is that fact-finding is not just about the functioning of the government or of the other authority. In fact, fact-finding, as just mentioned by Justice Lokur, is also about any decision that will adversely affect my rights, my existence. Therefore, even in America, even in cases of environmental hazards, the information needs to be given to the public. Even in travel advisories need to be issued by the government. Please don't travel. It is dangerous to go to this country. So all this is part of the Constitution. Now, if you keep the public in the dark, which I'm sure Justice Lokur has had the experience, I certainly had the experience during COVID-19 pandemic. So many important things were being hidden from the people by the government. And it's not just one government. I had the same experience both in Telangana and in Uttarakhand. So it's not which government you're working, who's the party in power in which state. It may be different parties, but they all seem to have the same thought patterns that let's not tell the truth. And one thing everyone has to remember, especially the government, what has been said by Thomas Jefferson and also by Benjamin Franklin, a government that hides facts psychologically finds itself as a very weak government. Only weak rulers hide facts from the public. One of the qualities of leadership would have to be that you would have to place all the facts before your people so they can make the decision. So yes, Constitution, and not only the Constitution, even the international conventions talk about the people's right to know. In the case of a state of UP versus Raj Narayan, a decision given in 1975, the Honorable Supreme Court really said that right to know is part of Article 19(1)(a), therefore a fundamental right of the people. And it is from there that we have right to information in 2005, something that Kavita, and others in Ms. Indra Jaising and Kavita and all of us spearheaded, in Rajasthan, saying that people have the right to know how does a sarpanch actually work? Where is the money going, which is being given to the panchayat? So yes, it has both a constitutional as well as a legal foundation. But let us talk about the limitation. Yes, can I take this question later on in the program? Because that's a different segment altogether. And I would love to hear Justice Lokur's and Kavita's and Sinha's point of view also on limitations on fact-finding.
Sure, Justice John. That's totally fine. So far, we've got, I think, a very interesting and important constitutional perspective on the entire question of fact-finding. And we've been able to think of this within, as Justice John indicated, both the framework of the preamble and Justice Lokur indicated both the framework article and framework article 19. So there's a strong basis for thinking about this particular issue. And of course, it's very integral to democracy because as both the eminent speakers have indicated, if facts are not coming out, how is the public to make a decision? So it's very, very important that facts come out. And if facts are to come out, then we have to encourage the right to association and the right to assembly. They both are all linked up. You can't have a fact finding, in a sense, is about organizations coming together and doing this fact finding, which is the question which our two next speakers will address. Because the question of the fact finding done by by alt news as well as the People's Union of Civil Liberty is really flows from the right to association. You have coming together of an organization which is devoted to the entire issue of putting forward what they see as the truth in the public domain. That comes in the context, again, of the fact that the media is not providing the space for certain narratives. PUCL, of course, can, and the PUDR can speak about the very, very important report called Who are the Guilty on the Delhi program in 1984, and a range of other reports. So Kavita, do you want to tell us a little bit, again, from the perspective of a human rights organization, what is the kind of fact-finding work that you have done? What are the challenges that you face today?
Yeah. So I think it is one of the most important tools for a human rights organization that believes in non-violent means of communication. So we really have few tools, and this is actually one of the best. And so finding is very clearly truth finding. When a fact-finding team goes, we are going somewhere to ascertain the truth. And it is also about connecting with that community, which may have suffered a loss or an injury or are struggling against some violence, exploitation. It could be environmental, it could be anything. I've done a lot of hunger deaths, fact findings. Also, we went to the Supreme Court in 2001 with hunger deaths in Bara in Rajasthan, and it's the most difficult thing to study, hunger deaths. So fact finding is one of the most important tool, and I think why I think it is extremely important. I think in today's day and age, we've got to somewhere reclaim fact-finding once again, within the people, because of the kind of polarization that has been created. Our fact-finding reports are getting, they have a kind of declining credibility. Earlier, if the PUCL or PUDR or any other organization, Dalit organizations, put across something, there would be a lot of credibility to it. But now with the kind of propaganda machine that we have and a narrative against us, that we are urban Nakshals, we are Tukre gang, we are anti-government, we are Congress, etc., etc. So I think somewhere with fact-finding, truth-finding, we have to attach another variable called credibility. And that has always been there, because communication, somewhere factors in credibility at the core. Only if I have credibility will my communication get across. So for that, I think once again, we've got to remind ourselves something that has been said earlier about objectivity. How do we maintain that objectivity while we are fact-finding? And let me tell you, our fact-finding reports are very important and will continue to be important, because how else do you build a counter public opinion? How else do you build an opinion against, say, a narrative that has already been constructed? So I think credibility is something that we've got to really think before we move and process. Now, adhering to process and procedure, there is no shortcut in a fact finding. For instance, who constitutes the fact finding is very important, again, because it is associated not just with skills, it's associated with our objectivity. So who are the people whom you bring together, and then secondly, who are the people whom you meet? And definitely meeting all sides of a story of an incident is very, very important, and to write all the versions, to put down all the versions, and then, of course, arriving at your inference. So I just want to talk about a couple of challenges that we face and are faced with still. And I want to make it very clear. Fact-finding is not police investigation. Nowhere are we replacing police investigation. Neither do we have those tools to do police investigation. We are simply bringing out another dimension, another facet, talking to the people and bringing out a facet. It's a report for the public to know. And that is our basic intervention. Now, let me tell you about hunger deaths. I mean, I have not come across a single acknowledgement of hunger death in the history of more than 100 years. The mindset of Indian state is a colonial state. I mean, I don't know whether Justice Lokur has a memory of this PUCL case, but it started with hunger deaths. It was closed in 2016, and you were one of the judges because the new law had come. But it started with hunger deaths. And it's very interesting to see the counter that is presented. The counter that is presented in the court is a post-mortem report, that there was no grain found, or suddenly they'll say, no, there were 2 sacks of grains. It's a very standard way of countering a fact-finding. And here we would, of course, talk to various communities, go into various homes. There cannot be just one person dying. There would be a whole community living in distress. And you trace the distress with hunger. And you try to have a memory recall of what was that community or that household eating in the last few days. And you build a kind of very authentic framework of facts. And then you put it across. You have to rule out a lot of things. So, that no, it cannot be this, it cannot be this, and then you actually you build the praman, the authentication, and that is kind of the basis of your knowledge of saying that this is what happened. And the government will always deny it. What I'm saying, that there is a continuous denial when it comes to something like hunger death, and also when it comes to a lot of environmental work. So you are pitted somewhere against this. But if it was only the government that you were pitted against, it's easier to fight. You can try to build a public opinion, but these days, when we go for a fact finding, we are pitted against a whole community, number one, which prevents us from going into the area, which prevents us from unraveling the truth, which prevents us from meeting the people, the people who may be concerned. So you've got to withdraw, then go back. You've got to withdraw, then go back. And also, sometimes, the narrative of those affected also changes. And we know it for a long time. And this is so the last 10, 12 years where people have been thrown into jail when they've gone for fact-finding in Bastar, so-called left extremist conflict area. When people would go for fact-finding, they were thrown into jails. They were prevented from, crossing an area and then thrown in under some sections. So I think the challenges are multifold, apart from the fact that PUCL has a legacy of, who are the guilty. You mentioned, Arvind, about the Delhi riots, where there is a listing of 2,600 people who were killed in Delhi. It's a detailed listing from area to area. What a massive way that PUCL, PUDR went in. Their methodology is impeccable. Similarly, you have at the same time the Kanpur report, Doshi Kaun, which documents 51 people who were killed, to today's time, which is a totally different time. Earlier, I remember our reports not only would go directly into the Supreme Court, like in the right to food case and so many other cases. Justice Chauhan is here. He used, when he was our lawyer in the Rajasthan High Court, he would immediately use our reports, and the judges, we're not saying you use it as some investigation, but that's a point of view that you cannot ignore. It went into the basis of commission reports. But today there is very little space, because that space is part of the larger battle of trying to fight for truth to prevail. So today's challenge is to fact-finding, whether they be criminalizing, which we'll come to it later, or whether it is preventing people from trying to understand, the challenges of being obstructed, or from, the narrative is killed on day one, or you don't get space at all in the media. I think those challenges are connected to the larger challenges that we have faced in society, of how do we assure that truth prevails, that what is authentic, what is verified, what is proof. Literally, it's boiled down to that. What is the proof? And we are getting more and more cleverer, chiseling out more of proof to prove our point, because it is getting very difficult. But that is the only way out. And I think that process cannot, there's no shortcut to proving it, to getting the evidence that a fact-finding can. Because the narrative is always twofold. I cannot go into the details, but when it is communal atrocities, Dalit atrocities, atrocities between two castes, two communities, then you have two contesting narratives. How do you bring that proof together? Those are the challenges which I think we know how to take it across. And at the same time, I want to say this, that it doesn't mean that you treat the subject that has been affected clinically. There has to be fraternity. There has to be solidarity. That report is for them to fight. Now, those are some of the considerations that you need to keep when doing fact-finding.
Thank you, Kavita, for that exhaustive account of really the challenges as well as the importance of fact-finding. I want to turn to Pratik now, who comes from, if Kavita represents maybe one of the oldest civil liberties organizations, Pratik represents a newer kind of an organization, which is born in the time of the social media with its own series of challenges and own maybe even more difficult challenges with respect to the question of what is a fact and how do you take fact finding forward. Pratik, so the floor is yours.
Thanks. So the kind of fact finding or fact checking that we are working on is not amongst the people. It is kind of amongst the people, but it is also in this ethereal space that is called the social media. And there, what is happening on a day-to-day basis is that all the conversations are going farther and farther away from fact. And what is different from, let's say, the time I was growing up to now, the social media time, is one thing that is very different is who's controlling what conversations we are part of. And the answer to that is the social media companies. They are controlling what conversations we'll be part of. So let's say when I was a 15-year-old going to school in the 90s, then the conversations, there's no algorithm controlling what kind of conversations I will hear. So we would get diverse set of opinions, and that way one can form the worldview in a better way. But someone who's growing up now and let's say starts using social media at the age of 8, 9. We've been going to different schools and looking at what the children are watching, and they start using social media at the age of 8, 9 and developing a worldview based on social media. That there is a huge departure from the kind of from the sort of worldview that I developed when I grew up. So here that is where the importance of fact checking comes, or the importance of fact comes, that right now we are in an algorithm driven world where we have most people have access to very selective information, not because of lack of access, but because of what is being fed to them. And all of us are surrounded with one kind of information. So let's say if there's somebody who's on the right wing and likes a few right wing pages, then Facebook and Instagram and YouTube will feed them more of the right wing content. If it's the opposite, then opposite kind of content will be fed. So basically, in terms of the opinions and views that are being formed within our heads, there's absolutely no diversity. And that is the danger. That is the danger. And this is being the manifestation of this is being seen in the society in multiple ways. The kind of radicalization that we are seeing. So, for example, the Bullibai case or the Sulli Deals case, where one child from Guwahati, one child from Bangalore, one child from another state, I forget, three under 20 boys, they got together online and they wanted to auction Muslim women. Now, why did they want to auction Muslim women? The reason is because the Muslim community has been almost brought to a subhuman level in India. The way they have been spoken about, they have been brought to a subhuman level in India. How has that happened? How have they been brought to a subhuman level? So the classic case would be Tablighi Jamaat, where there was a trend for days together called Corona Jihad, which said that Muslims are willingly spreading COVID, and including India Today putting out, in one of their graphic where they were showing COVID numbers. To show COVID numbers, the caricature was that of a person wearing a skull cap. So the kind of conversations that we are having today is so far away from fact that just like during COVID, each one of us wore a mask because each one of us we had the fear that if we get in touch with someone, then we are going to get in touch with the virus. In today's time, I feel that because we are consuming the kind of information that we are consuming, each one of us needs a mask. Each one of us needs how to figure out what information is authentic, what information is not authentic, how to look at something as basic as sources and things like that. Because if we don't do that, then this information ecosystem is consuming us. There's a 3-part article by Washington Post recently, just last week, where they talk about how the Indian government is bullying every social media platform, from Facebook to YouTube to Twitter, not to take down any right-wing content. So someone like Monu Manesar, who has recently been arrested, for months together, I think for 3-4 years, his Facebook feed comprised of videos of him going after trucks, shooting at their tires, then bringing out 2-3 men, beating them up. All of this is happening on live video, and this went on for 2 years. Now, this is when you look at policies of these social media companies, it clearly says that no incitement of violence, no hate speech, nothing is allowed. But the way the government is operating is that if you have to take down any one of these pages, then it is an uphill challenge. We keep writing to these social media platforms that, look, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. But there is no takedown of any kind of hate speech, any kind of violent content on social media. So the whole, not only are we being fed things algorithmically, but even that small possibility of moderation on social media, even that is gone, because the moderation is being controlled by the government as to what can be moderated and what cannot be moderated. So knowing that there is no control in terms of the source of information. The people, this Washington Post article also spoke about how and this is not a new thing, we all know, but it actually went and interviewed people, this quote unquote IT cell. It spoke about how hundreds and hundreds of young men and women, they are sitting and all they're doing is creating insightful memes and pushing it out on all kinds of WhatsApp channels. So then what is the defense? And I believe that the only defense is that each one of us invest time in figuring out how to look at information more critically. That is how to be a fact checker, because that is the only difference. Because there is no control on the source of information. It is only when we are receiving the information that we have some control as to how we receive the information. And unless we exercise that control, then I believe the polarization that we are seeing every single day, which is leading to somebody going into a train and shooting down 4 people. Where does that come from? That radicalization is coming from the WhatsApp and YouTube, etc. So unless we put on this mask really fast, I think things are going to be difficult.
Thank you, Pratik, for really highlighting the challenges in the time of social media. If I got you right, you're also saying that in terms of the algorithms, there's not much that we are able to do intervening from here. Would that be a fair assumption,
In
Pratik?
terms of no, so not that we are not able. The algorithms are designed in a way. What is the business model of a Facebook or a YouTube? The business model is that you spend maximum amount of time on social media so that you watch maximum number of advertisements. Their revenue is directly proportional to the amount of time you spend on social media or the amount of time you spend on their individual platforms and the amount of advertisements you watch. So the whole algorithm is tuned to you spending more and more time. Now, how do you get someone to spend more and more time? By showing them content which, through various parameters, through all sorts of surveillance, has been, the kind of surveillance that we go through on social media, not by the government, but the platforms themselves, in terms of what we like, what we don't like. And they figure out, okay, this is the kind of content that this person would like to watch. And when it is a polarized society with very, very strong views, then there is a clear departure in one section watching one kind of content, another section watching another kind of content. So what algorithms are doing is actually promoting the division, because the only way they can make more money is by showing a right wing guy more right wing content and left wing guy more left wing content. I mean, that's broadly how it works. So the problem is the design itself. There are few books that have been written about how the algorithms are at the core of a lot of things. If I take a non-political example, just till about 1.5 years ago, no, about 2 years ago, if you go on YouTube and if you look up one video of why vaccines don't work, the recommendation video, the next video will be vaccines don't work. The third video will vaccines don't work. The fourth video will vaccines don't work, because that is the recommendation engine. And by the end of it, you will be convinced that vaccines don't work. So that is the issue of the algorithm.
Thank you, Pratik. Justice Lokur, in terms of the concerns and issues raised by both Pratik and Kavita, in terms of the question of the broadly put the criminalization of fact finding, the increasing challenges human rights groups face in trying to get facts out in the public domain, do you have any thoughts or responses on how one can potentially deal with this new emerging scenario, as it were?
Yeah, I think Kavita made a very important point of credibility. Who is actually doing the fact finding, right? So unless the body or the individual is credible enough in the eyes of just about everybody, people are going to say, oh, it's biased, or there's some problem, selective facts, and so on and so forth. Let me give you the example. I give you the example of the environment. Okay. Now you have something like the extrajudicial killings in Manipur that had taken place. A very large number of extrajudicial killings. Now, in some cases, what the court was told was that, these people came, they stopped a bus and they picked up somebody and those people disappeared. May be true, one doesn't know, right? But may not also be true. Okay, so then what actually happened, So then of course, we had to set up some committees and ask them to find out, tell us, take some sample cases, find out, what has happened in that, and tell us, and if of credible people. There were also some commissions of inquiry, where they had district judges who had, carried out sort of a commission of inquiry on the orders of the government of the state government. So you had this material, which gave an indication that yes, it is not that all the so-called extrajudicial killings were bogus. It's not that all of them were genuine, but there is truth in this. Okay, because of the credibility of the people who were looking into the issues. You have this recent incident of the rape and murder in Hyderabad of that young lady, all right? And they said that, oh, we've got the rapists and there was an extrajudicial killing and all 4 of them were killed. Okay. Then you had some other fellow, that Kanpur person from UP, killed on the ground that he was trying to run away. What did the court do? The court said, all right, so far as that Hyderabad thing is concerned, they said, okay, we are going to get, a retired judge of the Supreme Court to be assisted by some people to tell us what actually happened. And then you got the report which told you what actually happened. All right. Now, there are allegations of extrajudicial killings, large number of extrajudicial killings in UP. Now, you ask the government of UP that, oh, we've got reports about extrajudicial killings. What do you have to say? They're not going to say, yes, there are extrajudicial killings. We just picked up people and bumped them off. They're not going to admit it, obviously. So you have to have, a credible body of people. It could be an individual, it could be a body, which will look into it. It's not in the nature of a police investigation because the police are going to look at it from a different perspective. But so that we know that this is what the truth is, right? Now, Kavita tells me that Justice Chauhan had taken cognizance of, what had happened in Hyderabad when he was there as the Chief Justice. That's the way to go about it. Okay. Now, supposing the court doesn't take cognizance for whatever reason, I mean, not that they're not interested, but they don't take, cognizance. Then you have private bodies which are doing something. Now, somebody like the Editors Guild of India. Either you say that, they're all dishonest people, or you say that, well, they have some credibility. I mean, they're not small, persons, fly-by-night kind of operators. So when they give a report, there's obviously some truth in it. So you could have private bodies doing the work which should normally be done by the state. All right, but the state doesn't want to do it. Why? Because it may be complicit, or it may not be able to give you the correct picture, or it doesn't want to give you the correct picture. Right? So then you have private individuals doing it. What's wrong with it? Gandhiji didn't do it because the British government told him to carry out some kind of a report. He felt it was necessary. He did it. What's wrong with it? So as long as you have people who are credible, as long as you have facts that are objectively placed, I think that's good enough. That's the truth. But if somebody objects to it and says, no, this is not the truth, well, then you tell us what is the truth. You can't say that, listen, this is not the truth, but I'm not going to tell you what I think is the truth. Right? So I think that's the way we have to look at it, the entire problem. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Justice Lukur. Justice Chauhan, firstly, the question which is left over from last time, which you really wanted to address, which is the question of what are the limitations on fact finding. But also I want to add the other question, which we asked Justice Lukur, which is reflecting on both what Pratik and Kavita put forward and your reflections. Now that we've understood the constitutional basis of fact finding and the necessity and importance of it, what can civil liberties organizations potentially do with the challenges that they face today? Thank you, Justice Chauhan.
Thank you, Arvind. I believe there are 3 parts to your question. So let's with limitation, but go, take a step back. First of all, the question is, what is the purpose of fact-finding? Today we are called the age of witness. If you remember, when the Nuremberg trials were carried out, the witnesses spoke only through affidavits. They never came before the commission or before the court. The purpose of fact-finding is to give a voice to the victim, where the victim no longer continues to be the victim. In fact, through the report, he becomes a threat to the political system, to the governance, to the government. So that is one reason why we want fact-finding. Number two, of course, is to find out what actually transpired. As you know, Kavita said, to get to the meat of the matter, what actually happened. And that's what Gandhiji also says when he talks about ethics of fact-finding. He says, focus on those facts which the state is trying its best to cover up. Number one. Number two, please put your fact-finding reports in a historical perspective. For example, if I had to do a fact-finding of what is the crisis being faced in Manipur today, I would not only talk about what is the conflict between two communities. I would first like to understand, is there historical precedent? Why these communities having at loggerheads with each other? Does it have to do with tribal rivalry, or does it not have to do with tribal rivalry? Is it has to do with conflict between two religion, or does it not have to do with that? So first I'll put it in historical perspective, then bring it to the present condition. Number three, I think the purpose of fact-finding is adding to the current history. For example, Gandhiji's, both his reports on Jallianwala Bagh as well as on Champaran agitation were first part of the current history of his time, now part of our modern history of India. So that is the third reason why we need fact-finding. Fourthly, it connects truth to the concept of justice, because what are you trying to achieve through that fact-finding is to ensure that justice is done to those who were the victims of that incident or that conflict. Number five, I would tend to think it talks about accountability of the governance. Therefore, those who have defaulted in their rightful or legal purposes, duties which were assigned, they should be questioned. Their status should be questioned. Their credibility should be questioned, and they should be made accountable to the people. Lastly, as if you read Gandhiji's entire exposure, it exposes the oppression caused by the law themselves. How good are your laws? How valid are your laws? Do you need to rethink about your laws? Do you need to amend your laws? Do you need to repeat your laws now? And this is what is the narrative, I would say, for the last 20 years, when the Iron Lady of Manipur protests about a law that she considered for decades to be unfair, to be unjust to the people of Manipur. Why did we not take notice of it? Why did we not sit up and say, wait a minute, let us rethink. There is a voice of dissent, but that voice of dissent in the Indian civilization has always been very important. In fact, there's a beautiful book called The India Dissents. Please read that book. You'll find how many dissenting voices we have had throughout our history. Now, this brings us to the second question. What should be the limitation on fact-finding? Because fact-finding also has, certain, I would not use the word dark side, but it has certain consequences for the society and for the state. I think, first of all, we have to distinguish between fact-finding commissions and criminal investigation. As rightly said by Kavita, a fact-finding is not holding a criminal investigation. We just don't have the machinery, the means and the methods and strategies that are required for a criminal investigation. So it's not something that is being done by the investigating agency, supported and created by the state. No. As rightly said by Justice Lokur, fact-finding can be by an individual, as in the case of Mahatma Gandhiji's report, or it can be by organization, national or international. And it can be by anyone credible if they enjoy certain credibility. For example, the Editors Guild. These are people who have been doing investigating journalism But then the question is, then what are the limits on investigating journalism? Because the other extreme is something that I'm sure bothers many of my brothers in the judiciary, what we call trial by media. Now that is also fact-finding. But how much fact should be revealed? For example, in Sweden, they have a fantastic law, which I wonder somebody would ever think of bringing to India. The law in Sweden with regard to reporting in the press about any criminal cases, the moment the FIR is filed, the press cannot report about it till the final verdict is given in the trial. After the verdict is pronounced, the press is free to discuss the merits or demerits of the verdict, but you will not, during the process of investigation, start revealing facts to the public at large. And I'll give you a simple example. Once there was a bomb that exploded somewhere in Ahmedabad, and I believe there was only a sole eyewitness. Aaj Tak went out, traced down the gentleman, and interviewed him. How do you put your sole witness into such a jeopardy that you show his face to the public at large, including those who may have carried out that bomb explosion? Are you not jeopardizing his life? Then what happens to the concept of protection of the witness? That gentleman should have been whisked away by the investigating agency, protected because he is going to be your star witness in the prosecution. Therefore, the question is, how much debate should be in the media given during the investigational process? We tend to make up our mind, yes, this criminal this alleged accused is guilty. And what will be the ultimate consequence? Suppose the public comes with the feeling that, yes, this gentleman is indeed guilty, and yet the judiciary, the judge says, I'm sorry, but you're not guilty. In fact, you're innocent. Then people begin to have doubt about the credibility of the judiciary. Then are you not undermining your rule of law? Therefore, I think there have to be, and in fact, repeatedly the Honorable Supreme Court has been saying that let us debate the limits on the media, and now even limits on social media, as rightly pointed out by Prateek. Social media is playing a very, very diabolical role in increasing that division within the society. Therefore, the question now everyone is asking, not only we are asking in India, but even internationally, people are asking, what is the role of these social medias? What are the responsibilities of the intermediaries? Should they have the monopoly? Should they not have the monopoly? If they do not want, should not have the monopoly, then how do we break up the monopoly? How do we control the content? Hate speeches, ridiculous facts. For example, since I'm a history buff, I can tell you, the Indian history is now suddenly being put on its head. Narratives which never existed, for which we do not have any evidence. Somebody says that, Lord so-and-so is born in the year 5168 BC on August 8th. I really like to know, did somebody find his birth certificate? If they have discovered his birth certificate, please present it to us. I would love to see, because in 5168, that's pre-Indus Valley civilization you're talking about. The only remnants of that civilization in that age is a dinky little village in the middle of Sindh. That's it. That's the evidence. Now you're talking about the birth of a deity in an avatar, which talks about a very complex civilization in our epics. And you place Indus, how can possibly try to understand what is the limitation. Every system that we invent has to have its own parameters. And I think it's very necessary to try to debate and discuss what should be the parameters put. Because, as Justice Lokuram has repeatedly pointed out through his judgments, you are on a very tight rope. There is freedom of speech and expression, and yet there is restriction. 19.2, Article 19.2 somehow seems to be forgotten somewhere in this context. I think people should talk about, okay, what are the reasonable restrictions we can put on social media, especially when it begins to play such a decisive role. So, and lastly, I would say, in fact, for example, in the case of Shaheen Bagh, you have 22 fact-finding reports ranging from human rights NGOs to the Minority Commission report to a Hindu human rights report, which interestingly echoes the entire narrative of the government. Now, then where does truth lie? Then doesn't truth become the final victim beside the people who are the victims of that tragedy? Hasn't truth now become the victim? Therefore, we also have to see, as pointed out by Justice Lokur, who is speaking? What is their credibility? So I think we need to now discuss that on a larger stage, on a larger framework.
Thank you. Thank you, Justice Chauhan. And taking the 2 points, or the points made by both Justice Chauhan and Justice Lokur to our 2 civil society colleagues, both Kavita and Pratik. If you'd like to respond to in a sense, Justice Lokur's point, which is that the fact finding would be one of the ways to address the challenge of fact finding is having a credible voice, as it were. That's the point that Justice Lokur made. And Justice Chauhan highlighted the entire question of the limitations which would be necessary or may be necessary in the context of fact finding itself. To ensure, for example, that there are credible voices, to ensure that your voice is not drowned out in a multitude of voices which have no credibility whatsoever, there needs to be some way in which you think of the entire question, as he aptly put it, the question of reasonable restrictions. What is a restriction one to think of, even from the point of view of a credible fact finding? Kavita, you want to address that?
Yeah. So I think there are like 2-3 different kinds of things that we have to talk about. I'm going to focus on today's scenario of establishing truth, putting across the proofs to state, or the whatever you call it, evidence, to verify a fact. After all, fact finding has to have facts which are verifiable. And that's why you're going and getting different kinds of versions and digging up and reading up. So I want to add one more dimension to this whole thing. And it quite connects with what Pratik was saying, that these days there is an orchestrated attack. And we have to remember it, to drown the voices of truth. Say, for instance, we have the Constitutional Conduct Group, people who were in government, in the highest office, have come together to become actually that objective voice. They thought that if they're there, it's a huge group which deliberates, discusses, so that they will be an objective voice. But now you have a counter. You have a lot of statements coming out and reports which are of a similar set of people, who are trying to contradict this particular group. So if there are civil liberties fact finding, then there are these, what you were saying, there are some Hindutva groups who come under whatever garb and do the fact finding. So I think this kind of deliberate, orchestrated attack on people's voices. Actually, yes, Justice Chauhan, there is a lot of rubbish also that is posted. But how do you bring to the fore, keep alive, get across the voice of the voiceless? There are reports who are meant to put across those voices that were drowned, those voices that would never come across in an investigation, those voices which would not be taken even in an investigation. So the challenge remains for us, much more than even, like, say, for Manipur. Now that so much of confusion gets caused that truth actually, we a lot of us have an understanding of what the truth is, but there is just so many other kinds of confusion. So it's in this context where I would like to make a suggestion, and especially as I have been also talking in the PUCL, we are not just dealing with failure in due diligence, which is something we documented, fixed responsibilities, kept our demands. We are not just looking at irregularities of the police system. You have the complete non-state actors who are sponsored, you know it, or who have now become so huge, they're Frankensteins. Actually, it is in this context that you've got to talk of how the truth is going to stand out, and the truth will stand out by changing actors. I think somewhere we need to get more voices of women across. We need to get of really, women who never spoke out. I'm a very clever woman. If I speak this, she's urban Nakshal, see this, that, but we need to get newer faces. We need to get newer people. You need to get a lot of, we have to show that systemically they have nothing to gain. What is their vested interest? So we need to get newer and newer faces, newer people to bring across our voice. And therefore, it is not merely doing a fact finding. I wish we could be like Prateep, just look at all the records, but we have to actually go to a set of people. So you've got to change even your set of people. It cannot be just us. And I really mean this. I really wish to establish this point that somewhere it has to be a movement. There has to be a movement for getting truth back where it's located. And that has to be to bring in a lot of people whose voices otherwise, so they become subjects of that exercise as well as the voices. So your platforms. So fact finding also means not just going there. It also means establishing a platform. These are the newer and newer things that are emerging through our work of fact finding. Now, regarding the restrictions part and media, I don't know, of course, I don't agree with any kind of restriction of media except when it crosses the boundary of hate, etc. When in malign. So we are very glad that very soon the Supreme Court should, in a few hearings, at least give us some guidelines on media briefings. So your concern, Justice Sohan, of the side of media trial, our concern is also how even before an accused is established as somebody who may have committed a crime, is declared, is killed. I mean, what are these recent extrajudicial killings? So we would be glad if there is all that, but things have even gone beyond it. Things have actually even gone beyond what the Supreme Court says. So in that kind of setup, in that kind of confusion, I'm not willing to give up on truth being established by ordinary people like us. I think we just have to work harder and not give up on it and just go across. And every day there'll be a narrative. Today, it was the governor of Bihar talking in a particular meeting against the Editor Guild of India. It was the governor of Bihar, so you'll have, that is the orchestrated thing, that you have statutory people with constitutional authority, actually, so it's a whole set of people. So it's not merely a state apparatus with whom we were engaging with. It's these extra sections of the state apparatus and the people. In that situation, how does truth stand alone? How convincing it is? What are the facts? You've got to have your new drill for it. And I'm very glad that it's so dynamic. It's really great, and we are evolving. I mean, I just went for new. I just went around to do the new fact finding. There were some extremely interesting things, It is not the period, it's not the time to talk about it yet. It'll take up a lot of time. But even our methodologies, we've got to improve.
Thank you, Kavita. Prateek, again, do you want to? I think you, in some senses, you pointed out to the problems you face in terms of the entire question of hate speech, and it's especially your invocation of Monu Manasar and the fact that the videos were there for over a year, and obviously your concern is the question of how do you limit the question of hate speech is a concern you have very, very strongly, especially in the context of social media. But at the same time, the kinds of regulations you have of social media could be something which could infringe on the freedom of speech and expression very strongly in terms of the IT rules, etc. So do you want to address a little bit of how you all have been navigating this fine line between protecting the freedom of speech and expression, as well as making the case for limitations based on what Kavita indicated being hate speech?
Actually, we came to Bangalore office to discuss just that, if you recall. Yeah, but I just want to talk a bit about credibility and credibility of the organization involved. And uh, my understanding is that there are two things now. It is also the the power of the beast behind the narrative formation. How big a body is behind the narrative formation. So let's say one organization which may be credible brings out a fact checking report. Now this government knows that you have to produce a counter narrative. You can, आंख बंद करके आप बोल सकते हैं कि there will be a counter narrative. So somebody brings out one report, the government will bring out another report, okay, where they will get X number of people to form a report. Now the problem here is that that particular report will then be broadcasted by every mainstream media channel, while the report which has been done by a human rights organization will not be broadcasted by anyone. So eventually, what people know is the fact finding report by this new bodies which have been created to create alternative narratives. So, for example, Justice Chauhan, the fact finding report that Justice Chauhan was referencing to, we had actually fact checked that report. We had fact checked that report, and we had shown how there were multiple falsities in that case. But the point is that is going to, they are taking that fact finding report to Amit Shah, and that Amit Shah has accepted this fact finding report is being broadcasted by every media organization. Now the space for credibility has reduced a lot, because it is about what you're hearing. If whether a fact finding report about Delhi riots or Shaheen Bagh was credible or not, that issue becomes irrelevant because it doesn't reach people. So for me, the primary issue that I try to sort of keep addressing is that we can keep talking, but we're not reaching people. And that is where the multiplicative effect is necessary, that we figured out what is the multiplicative effect. They have figured out their multiplicative effect. Get every press, like ANI, etc., every media organization, they are going to repeat the same thing. And so if they say that the Prime Minister asked Putin to stop war for 6 hours, everybody will report that and everybody will believe that. So that multiplicative effect has been achieved. Where is the multiplicative effect here? So we shouldn't just talk about credibility there. We also have to talk about strategy. That how do we take our credible work and place it before people? I think there has to be some thought in that as well. Regarding the line, uh, uh, you know, I don't think there's much nuance as to what is happening on social media. No, of course, there has to be some nuance. I'm just saying that what I am witnessing as to what's happening on social media, where there are clear calls for violence, clear calls for economic disenfranchisement, clear calls ki, acha, vote kyun karne de rahe? Why are they being allowed to vote? So there, the kind of hate speech that I am witnessing every single day, it clearly falls in the case where it should not be allowed. So we have far gone beyond the point in terms of what is happening on social media as to what should be allowed. T. Raja Singh does the BJP MLA from Hyderabad, or Goshmala, I forget what the constituency is called. He does on Ram Navami. There's a 11-hour live video of him on YouTube and Facebook that are broadcasted simultaneously, and multiple places this person indirectly says that Muslims should be eliminated. And what is the way to get that video down? We write emails to each one of these organizations. We do a huge amount of tamasha on social media. Then grudgingly, one of these platforms takes down the videos. So the realm we are operating right now is that, and I just want to bring one point here about India becoming this geopolitical power, where India is being seen as against China. So that India is an important ally against China, and what that is doing is that all these social media companies, which are American companies, whether it's Facebook, Google, all of these, the Indian government is very successfully using this position as being an ally, a Western ally against China, to do whatever they want to do. So this newfound position and that confidence that you can see in our foreign minister's speeches, this newfound confidence is also being used to bully these social media organizations so that they can get their own way. So the problem is multifold. And again, coming back to your question about where is the limit, that is something that has to be thought about. That is why I came to your office, that there has to be a policy around, firstly, a culturally sensitive policy around hate speech. For example, if you go to the Facebook website and they have one whole page on what is considered hate speech, from an Indian perspective, you'll find only two things. You can't use caste abuse, and you can't call Muslims pigs. From an Indian context, you'll find only those two things. There are other things that you can't call Hispanics this, you can't call you know African Americans. There are other things. From an Indian context, you have exactly two lines in the Facebook hate speech policy document. And so now the kind of things that are being said on social media, that context has to be broadened, and then we can talk about, okay, what are limits, what are no limits. But right now there's no policy at all in terms of what is hate speech and what is not hate speech from an Indian cultural context.
Thank you, Pratik. We have two questions from Ms. Jaising. I think, Justice Lokur, you've answered the first one, but if you'd like to come in again, I'll just read the question out to Justice Lokur. In your judgment on extrajudicial killings in Manipur, you set up a fact-finding committee of 3 judges to decide what further directions to give. Can you elaborate how this helped in doing justice? This has not happened in the current Manipur case, therefore the question. I'll read out maybe the other 2 questions as well, and then maybe we can take a round, and people can, all of you can come in. The second question is, in a judgment from Punjab and Haryana High Court some years ago, we were stopped from holding a people's commission accused of usurping a judicial function. Your thoughts on this, please? Maybe Justice Chavan, you could comment on that point. And the third question is, recently Ram Punyani wrote in The Wire that BJP is in a dilemma of using the brand of Gandhi while destroying its essence. The recent changes in the CBSE curriculum include removing of the upper caste identity of Godse and the popular accusation by RSS about Gandhi being a Hindu-phobic leader. Do you think that the Modi government, which is right now flirting with fascism, might have to continue to use Gandhi as a brand image to appease the public and maintain its international image? So these 3 questions are there. Also, we can include it with any closing comments you may have, and we'll just go in that order. Justice Lokur?
Yes. So far as the Punjab Haryana High Court order is concerned, I'm frankly not familiar with it, but I don't see anything wrong in having a People's Commission. What's wrong with it? I mean, the People's Commission, is not intended to be a substitute for a police investigation, right? It's the court is doing its own job. They're doing whatever they're supposed to do in that particular case, but that doesn't mean that nobody else can do that job. There might be a perspective that the People's Commission may find out. It might help the judiciary, to say that you're trying to usurp the judicial function. I don't think that's correct at all. And like I said, in Manipur extrajudicial killings, in environmental cases, even in this Hyderabad extrajudicial killing, the court has said that, listen, let's have a commission. They've appointed a commission. Now, who's that person who's been appointed as a commission? It's a retired judge of the Supreme Court, or it could be some other person. But that, in that sense, it's a People's Commission. It's not, SIT kind of thing. So I don't buy this thing about People's Commission usurping judicial function. I don't think that's correct at all. I don't support that point of view. About the other thing about Gandhiji being a brand that is being used, Gandhiji is far above all this. I mean, everybody knows who Gandhiji is, right? You can malign him, you can do whatever you want, but nobody's ever going to believe it. Okay? You may not agree with certain things that he has to say. Dr. Ambedkar did not agree with certain things that he had to say, but so what? What's wrong with it? But to say that Gandhiji can be used for this, Gandhiji can be used for that, I think he's just above all this.
Thank you, Justice Lokur. Justice Chauhan? Justice Chauhan, I think you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you, Arvind. Number one, I'm also not familiar with that particular judgment pronounced by the Honorable Punjab and Haryana High Court. But my view is very similar to what Justice Lokur just said. Firstly, truth is multifaceted. Therefore, the more point of views we have, the better it is. And it's a better methodology to discover what exactly is the truth. We cannot forget one thing. When we invented our gods in India, we were very clever. Brahma has 4 faces. And this is the very reason why Lord Brahma has 4 faces. Every angle will give you a different perspective on a given situation. Therefore, I don't think the High Court is justified in saying that you cannot have a People's Commission. Why not? Perhaps they would have the courage to tell the emperor that I'm sorry, but you have no clothes. Now, if somebody does have that courage to tell the emperor, so much the better for democracy, for rule of law. So I would, in fact, encourage People's Commission. The only thing is, as rightly put by Pratik and by Kavita when the program began, there should not be any hidden agenda. As Gandhiji says, that fact-finding missions have to be extremely objective to the extent of even criticizing the very party that may have sponsored you. So an objective assessment has to be there. A fact-finding mission which has a hidden agenda is a dangerous thing. Then we have to take their finding not with a pinch of salt, but with at least a ton of salt. Then we have to worry about its veracity, its authenticity, its credibility. But to stop someone from investigating or to go for the research of what actually happened, I think is being unfair. That's very undemocratic. I think people have the right to investigate, to find out for themselves and for the society at large actually what is happening. For example, we would all like to know as citizens of this country what exactly is happening in Kashmir ever since there has been almost a Kashmir blackout in the media, or what is happening presently in Manipur, or even in states which are not burning up at this moment. For example, what is happening in Chhattisgarh? What is happening in, perhaps many good things are happening that we don't even know. There are certain inventions, creative people are coming with good things, but we are not informed by our media. Let me also bring one point to your notice. In Israel, there's a rule that you cannot and you will not print anything that is demoralizing or pessimistic in its content. Therefore, you will not show the dead bodies or talk about terrorism. If you wish to talk about it, please talk about it in the inner pages of the newspaper. And I think that's, in a way, correct. We must find out what are the brighter parts of this country. So a lot of things are happening that need to be brought out into the media. But to the other part, I would say, yes, we must also be very cautious about the limitations of fact-finding. As Pratik rightly said, and Kavita rightly pointed out, there are certain challenges to fact-finding which also need to be considered by us. For example, the recent amendments in the IT rules, where the government says the platforms will have to cooperate with the government in case any criticism of the central government is placed, which might be discovered to be fake, but discovered by whom? It may be an uncomfortable fact against the central government, but who is going to be the arbitrator in that case? Who is going to be adjudicating as to whether the fact is fake or it is reality? So I think even when the law is trying to put limitations, that law has to be critically analyzed. That does it meet our constitutional legalities, or does it not meet, or does it go against the core of the Constitution? So we have, a very difficult task uh, when we're talking to fact finding, freedom of speech and expression, right to know, and yet the other consequences that are coming up and emerging in our country right now. Thank you, Arvind.
Thank you, Justice John. Kavita?
Yeah. So why we left out the National Human Rights Commission and the state human rights commissions? They are bodies that are supposed to also be doing inquiries. They're supposed to be sending teams. They're supposed to be also putting together reports. But somehow, I think this panel needs to make a note and, to say it out loud, that they have failed us in their very basic duty of bringing out the truth, of actually highlighting what, and leading, actually. Many a times you lead the investigation also. A report can, highlight a certain aspect. And I think NHRC has failed us again and again. It failed us when soon after it was made. Between 93 and 94, you had the worst kind of killings in the Punjab. They just stopped after 3 crematoriums, They said, no, we won't go beyond this. And then I was part of a team, the documentation and advocacy project, the documentation team, which was a lot of us. And we uncovered more than 8,000. Out of 8,000, we stopped, because now where do we take all this? And in that, we also had policemen come and tell us that, yes, I saw 15 killings, I saw this, I saw that. But that report was, criminal cognizance was taken and the people had to flee India. I'm just giving an example of one such report where even when we wrote to the NHRC, you didn't do it, we are doing it. Please come and at least speak out for those who are being criminalized. So NHRC will not do fact-finding and not stand up for those who are criminalized. And I think that is something we've really got to say firmly on this. And I don't think they can abdicate their responsibility because it is a body which is supposed to lead us all, So this was one closing point that I wish to make, and the other point. Well, fact-finding comes after an event. Why allow the event to happen? Like, as a human rights worker, I have to stop this hate from happening. I've got to nip in the bud what is, like, say, a Monu Manesar. Like, we've been writing about Monu Manesar for a long time because more than half of Mewat is Rajasthan. Mewat is a small district in Haryana, but three tehsils, big tehsils of our in 2 districts are Mewat. So we've been writing about it. Why do we have to, it's like post facto. I think as human rights workers, we've got to start thinking in advance. We have got to think of how to prevent it, and I think that also is something that I would like to make a note of, because later, of course, we want a lot of people who have been silenced. A lot of people have been silenced to also come out. But we've got to, as part of this discussion, as part of invoking Gandhi, as part of, how would I like to remember Gandhi today? I think pehla dharam, karm dharm hai. My first is to act, and I think I need to stop it also.
Thanks, Kavita. Pratik?
Is there a specific question?
Oh, no, just any final concluding thoughts you have, and then we can.
Just that, I think there has to be a more united effort. I think this has been said again and again in multiple forums, and it hasn't come about to be, but there has to be a more united effort where multiple skills are combined. Organizations like ours have certain skills, PUCL has certain skills, and there has to be a coming together of different organizations who are involved in the process of fact finding, and also understand different aspects of how to propagate the message, so that facts reach more people.
Thank you to all our speakers and for this really very interesting and very educative panel in which I think we paid a very nice remembrance, very nice remembrance of Gandhiji from the perspective of civil liberties, from the perspective of constitutional values, and from the perspective of the most important point, the most of the idea of experiments with truth. So thank you again for being here.